looked at Edge growth, and what did the numbers tell you that the narrative didn't?
There's different ways that we can unlock new forms of capital to have different forms of impact.
So I think one of the things that attracted me and us to the Edge Growth business is that mission to reduce inequality.
We are in the business of creating value for this country.
What problem can you now solve that we simply couldn't do when we were alone or were not, partnered in this way?
So this wasn't really about buying a business for us, but rather partnering with founders that we believed shared a similar vision.
And I think South Africa needs to get out of this, four banks, four mines, for this kind of mentality if we're going to build a country that delivers value for all of us.
And if you look at where the country is now, I think infrastructure-led growth is a clear theme within that.
Most organizations talk about transformation. Some advise on it. A smaller number actually live it. Edge Growth has spent 19 years advising businesses that transformation is both a moral and commercial imperative. 2.5 billion rand of assets under management, more than 14,000 jobs created, more than 1,200 SMEs incubated and funded. But at the original onset of this business, being transformed has always been part of its vision. Today's conversation is about that journey. I'm joined by three leaders today who, each in their own right, have made a bet on a more equitable South Africa, not through rhetoric, but through capital and ownership. My guest today is Daniel Hatfield, the CEO and co-founder, who built Edge from a startup into one of South Africa's most respected impact investment firms, Fumani Mthembi, Sustainability Director at Pele Energy Group, who has delivered more than 3.5 gigawatts of renewable energy and tied every one of those projects to the economic development of the communities that host them. And Ngoku-Sakhile Mazwi, CEO of Bayakha Infrastructure Partners, a 100% black-owned fund manager who now sits on the Edge Growth Board and whose career has been built at the intersection of private capital and inclusive growth. Thank you all for joining me. And I'd like to start this conversation at the very beginning, and that's with you, Dan, before I bring Fumani and Ngoku in. I want to start where it all started, with you and this firm that you built. You've been doing this for nearly 20 years, and when you started in 2007, I want you to take us back to that original vision. And when you designed that vision, was this transformation journey always part of that original vision, and was always part of getting to where Edge is today?
Thanks, Navs. Yeah, I think that the beautiful thing about Edge was that we started the company with the vision of the business very much being with transformation in mind. So the core of what we were doing, we believed passionately, probably quite naively, that by growing small businesses, we had the ability to transform a nation. And that transformation happens in so many different ways. It happens in the jobs you create through the growth of those businesses, but it also happens in the way in which those entrepreneurial teams form, the diversity of the entrepreneurial teams that make it happen, and all the different players in the ecosystem that support that growth. And so at the heart of Edge, we believed that our mission was transformational. It was transformational on so many different levels, on the social impact level, from the true sense of the word in South Africa, a BE transformation level. We believed that the majority of businesses we would be backing would be black-owned, female-owned, led businesses that could not just derive the social impact through the growth of their businesses, but through their growth and the wealth creation of themselves, it would change the structure of the economy. So certainly from the heart of the business, it was about transformation. But then there was also a realization, if I'm going to be blunt, that we were three white male founders, and we also believed that for us to grow a great business, we needed to bring diversity into our business as well through that journey. And it needed to happen on many different layers. I think often this is oversimplified. So yes, it was about the people in the team, but it was about who were the shareholders, who were the decision makers. So what did the governance look like? It was the service providers we used. It was where we directed our surplus time and energy, the socio-economic development initiatives we took on. So we just felt that we had to hold the mirror to ourselves, and through the course of the 20 years that have followed, we've intentionally and across all of those different levels really tried to transform, not just at a letter of the codes level, but really at a heart level.
And I think this conversation about the spirit of the codes and the letter of the codes ultimately boils down to, how do you make that come alive practically? And so Edge, being on this journey for 20 years, finds itself, at this transaction. And Ngoku, I want to bring you in here because there's a lot of talk and transformation is not a new thing, but recently transformation has been at the center of many debates and whether it really is being upheld or not. And Ngoku, you came through to this transaction and relationship with the transformation lens, but you also came through with a different lens, something institutional investment, pension fund led, and infrastructure. And so when you looked at Edge growth, and what did the numbers tell you that the narrative didn't, that made you interested and excited?
Good question. I think for us, it really was more authentic, and I think we believed in the transformation journey that Edge has led in the country more than anything. And what we wanted to do is have that transformation journey reflected in the ownership of the business. So this wasn't really about buying a business for us, but rather partnering with founders that we believed shared a similar vision. So, and the vision for Edge, as we see it, is really around job creation, really around impact, and inclusive growth, and that's what we saw. Whenever we look at businesses, it's not just about the numbers. The numbers are always important, but I think a shared value system is something that is very important to us, and transformation is something that we believe in at Bayakha quite strongly, given that our stories reflect transformation, and are a story of transformation and growth within South Africa.
And you say, you obviously made the point around shared value system, so that brings us down to principles. What was that for you that was kind of a standout from the principles that Edge has and upholds in the work and in the work that Dan mentioned?
I think the most important aspect of what Edge does for me is supporting SMMEs. Being a founder myself who runs an SMME, I can identify with most SMMEs in the country. And job creation is something that I think is something we need to deal with. It's one of the challenges, I'd say, that South Africa has. One is inequality, one is job creation. And I think Edge is really focusing on those two things and trying to create platforms and products that address those two areas of challenges in our country. So I'd say that's where we resonated most.
That's where the alignment happened the most on the job creation and inequality, particularly within the SME space. Fumani, I want to bring you into this conversation. I mean, you said in a press release that this investment lets you institutionalize Knowledge Pele's work. So what made you look at an SME fund manager and incubator and say, this is where KP's work belongs or can be augmented or enhanced in this transaction?
Absolutely. I mean, I think I'll, in a sense, bring together points made by Dan and Ngoku thus far to say, the story of Pele is anchored around, Dan mentioned the term the economic structure, and we refer to ourselves as being in the business of structural transformation, right? And I think in perhaps in sort of regulatory terms, we speak of the country's economic development project through the language of transformation, but primarily how we've always understood what needs to happen post the project of political freedom is, the project of economic freedom. And, how you give life to that in terms of rules and institutions has been through the BBBE codes. But it's required, I think, entrepreneurs such as ourselves to then take that further and give it real meaning, in the context of Billy's story, and in particular the work that Knowledge Billy does as a subsidiary of the group that is focused on community development, the focus of Knowledge Billy is on rebuilding the economies of communities that really sit on the periphery of the macroeconomic benefits that South Africa can generate. So we work in communities where it's clear to us that we have talented people who are being underserved. Underserved because, of course, there are many reasons. The fiscus is constrained, but also because I think there hasn't been enough creativity and intent applied to the context in which they live in order to rethink and rebuild those community contexts. And in particular, what we see as an opportunity is the recognition of a village, a township, a peri-urban community, not just as a living space, but as an economy, right? And this for me is where there's a clear intersection between the world of building SMMEs and the work that we do. So typically in our communities, we work with very small businesses. And so whilst Knowledge Billy has an enterprise development capability, it's really geared at survivalist enterprises. And our vision and hope for those businesses is that they will grow into enterprises that can be supported by Edge from a solutions and ventures perspective, because we hope that they'll move up the curve, in terms of their size and sophistication. And so the reason from a KP and Edge perspective, I think, of bringing the two together is ultimately to bolster our implementation capabilities as organizations that work with small businesses, appreciating that it is small businesses that will drive job creation. The two things are intimately linked. And so I think the two together provide a really formidable path to building our SME sector, appreciating that, what is a 10-man shop starts as a one-woman shop, let's say, and you need to be there for every stage of that business's growth and development in order to really achieve the results that we want to achieve, which would really mean having those businesses sitting side by side us, in a few years' time, as other great success stories of South Africa's economy.
So on the spectrum of, the economic freedom that we spoke about, actually, the Edge or the Knowledge Pele then Edge continuum is actually the evolution of that economic freedom principle that we're talking about. And currently it's done in the auspices of renewable energy and what have you, but it actually is broader than that, because if you look at the types of SMEs that you're focused on, exactly. They're different types, and what we've seen as Edge is that in these rural and peri-urban areas, actually helping people understand the economic model of their area and how to actually earn and spend money in those areas is the cornerstone of SME incubation and what you need to do there, because often what you see is that money leaves, and that's not what you want to achieve. I mean, interesting, and I want to come back to structural transformation in a second. I mean, Dan, I want to bring you into this because, when you looked at this next evolution of Edge and who the partners you bring on board are and what do they need to look like, what did you need to see in the partners that we were bringing on board, particularly from a Pele perspective or Knowledge Pele Bayakha perspective? And I think we don't speak about the people themselves. What did you need to see from a people perspective that was important to still enable that original vision back in 2007?
So what I think would be helpful in answering that question would be to just take a bit of a zoom out of the overall shareholding and ownership journey that we've been on. So from the outset, within months of Edge being incepted as a business, we brought on Cedar Investment Trust because we felt that at the time we were not able to offer anything to an incoming shareholder. We didn't know exactly how our vision would translate, but we wanted to send a signal that to the extent that we make any surplus, we wanted it to channel to black female entrepreneurs, and that was the focus of the trust at the time. So that was like our first passive step into acknowledging that transformation was important for us. We then moved into a phase of our business where we needed active partners to help us with our specific growth initiatives, and that's where Vua Investments, when we were launching the Action Fund, came into being a helpful partner. They had skills which helped us in the value chain. AgriSense, we were doing some agricultural and supply chain work with mines, and they had experience in that space, and we actually needed that executive horsepower on the ground, and that's what came with those two shareholders. And we worked with them for a number of years. One exited, one still remains a shareholder in one of our funds. We then realized that actually we needed to look internally and actually see to what extent we'd built some value as a business. We could translate that into a ESOP where our own employees could benefit and share in the growth of the business. And so that was important to look internally and to try and make it more operational. One of our key executives at the time bought shareholding in Edge at that stage too. And it was, again, an executive view on transformation. So what you can see forming here is we're going from passive to operationally relevant to internal executive. And then we reached the point that we said we need strategic shareholders. And our first strategic shareholder almost 6 years ago was African Rainbow Capital. And they brought with them a brand, but they also brought real rigor around the investment management process. They brought a number of other key network partners, and we've done work with a number of the other portfolio companies. So that was a strategic partner from both a growth and a elevation of our transformation brand perspective. And then, fast forward to today, and we looked at, what is going to unlock the next wave of impact and growth for us as a business. And two things that, one we've spoken about more specifically, or Fumani drew our attention to, is this evolution of the SME ecosystem and finding areas in the economy where there were people doing work where we felt like we were a natural synergistic partner or next step, that continuum of the SME growth. And we spoke about Knowledge Pele, but also, where Bayakha comes in and the vision of Pele around unlocking different forms of impact capital through what we had believed we'd developed as Edge, which is the ability to be a platform of funds. There are very few businesses that have built the infrastructure that we have around. There are already 8 funds that we manage, the compliance overhead, the governance overhead, the legal infrastructure. And so it really set us up to go after different forms of capital that we felt were looking for a way of being conduited to the SME in a more bespoke way that could really drive inclusive growth. So in that, we were looking for that sort of a strategic partner. So just wanted to, it's a long answer, but take you through that evolution to get to why Pele. And then specifically Pele, because there could have hypothetically been other businesses that fitted that bill. And we did actually, consider a number of other businesses that fitted that bill. But Pele, there was alignment in the entrepreneurial energy of the business. They're a business that's also grown from one employee. And so they know what it takes, and they have a feel for that, and they know what it requires from a governance, from an involvement point of view, to really unlock energy in a business. Values alignment, that's something that we spoke to earlier. Like when you're in the room with someone, you believe you have shared beliefs and you would run the business in the same way. That cannot be underestimated. When the going gets tough later down the line, because it always does, that's what actually keeps you together. And then there were, the synergistic benefits that we have started speaking about, and happy to talk a little bit more about in the conversation that follows. So put all of that together, and it felt like there was a really good fit.
Yeah, and I think, coming to on the values alignment, but more at a philosophical level, which you raised, is that job creation is important, but the impact of job creation then becomes something that you're also chasing. Because when you're funding a black business in a community, which is creating direct jobs, but also indirect jobs. Here, you're supporting the local soccer club, or you're providing, food for the soup kitchen. So there's a lot of indirect benefit to job creation. I think for me, and that's one of the principles of this partnership. I think for me, there's this. So the chemistry the chemistry was there, and values were aligned, but I actually want to get a little bit more practical, because alignment is not necessarily strategy. And so if we could talk about, and maybe Fumani, you mentioned, structural transformation, and that's probably where we could start in answering the next question that I have. But between Edge's SME development expertise and funding, and Bayakha's infrastructure investment capability, Pele's renewable energy and the community development platform, what problem can you, or do you see now, what problem can you now solve that we simply couldn't do when we were alone or were not, partnered in this way?
That's a very good question, because it's still early days in the partnership. We completed the acquisition last year around this time, actually, so I think we're close to our anniversary date. And we have a shared vision that has to do, obviously, with addressing these issues. And I think we understand the path to, let me say we have a shared theory of change, so we really believe that you can affect change through focusing on elements of what constitute the microeconomy, right? So individuals and small businesses. And I think it's a reflection of our own, on some level, personal stories, that we were invested in the same way, and there was a belief in our ability to get things done, and as a consequence we have. The future of where we're headed, as I see it, is that what we represent, and what I would hope that even the state perceives of a partnership of this nature, is that we are a petri dish of what is possible and can be scaled at a much greater level, right? We are what the state is not always able to do, which is to pilot and be creative and innovate. We have that room because we operate in the private sector, but we're operating towards what is the national objective, right? Our businesses really have at their core the national development agenda. That is why we exist. And so the next frontier, when I think of problems that we need to be solving, has to do with what is actually a more fundamental question around what it means to invest in and support the development of businesses. Because whilst we're in the business of doing that, I think as businesses ourselves, we've had varied experiences of that. I mean, we, in our early journey, were also, recipients of, ESD, enterprise and supply development support. So, we were in offices that, were owned by a different company, in our case, Lebona Engineering. And so we know what that kind of passive support can do, which for us was a lot. All of a sudden we could host meetings with, clients and partners, right? And so that's one avenue of supporting enterprises. And then we were in like a formal training program, which for the most part, it didn't actually feel like a fit for us because we already had degrees, we'd already had our first jobs. So to kind of go back into like, what is accounting 101 wasn't the best thing for us. So what I'm wanting to see come out of our relationship is a refined understanding of what really is most impactful, so what really delivers bang for buck when you're working with entrepreneurs, how to tailor interventions in a way that's meaningful. And I think in time, having bedded down I'll call it technical support of entrepreneurs, and in some respects on the venture side, financial support of entrepreneurs, we need to bring our evidence to the country and a broader community, but to really talk about, in particular in the South African economy, challenges around funding SMEs, right? Because Billy was never funded, by way of example. The first transaction we ever did with a third party was really a big debt package, or quasi-equity package with a bank. Now, that we got to, at that point, 11 years without being funded, whilst building a balance sheet and doing all of that, says a lot about the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And so I think what we stand for and what we're here to do is use all of this knowledge to generate the evidence to talk about how best to support SMMEs to thrive in this economy because they are the drivers of engine and growth. But right now there's very scant evidence, you know, so everyone kind of does whatever.
Agreed. And I think that's what also fuels this rhetoric of, is transformation working, is it not working? But you guys are a case study that actually it does work when applied correctly. And when you bring the ecosystem together in a way that puts the SME at the front and center of this support that you're providing. I mean, you know, the things that I often sound like a stuck tape recorder, but the reality is that if you don't have access to tailored incubation support that matters to that business and that entrepreneur, your incubation is falling flat. If you don't have funding that understands the context of a black entrepreneur, firstly, I cannot access this funding at conventional banking institutions because of my credit rating and then the credit scoring framework. It doesn't understand that actually I need to work this money in order to repay it. So does your you know, your policies allow for that? And at the same time, you can't put money in here and then walk away. You actually need to walk that journey. Now you guys have been lucky to actually, you know, have 11 years of doing it on your own. But there are many SMEs that actually require this, you know, and this bringing together of these and Edge has been set up in a way that allows for that, access to skills, access to market, and access to finance. But I think what this partnership does is elevate that to say, like, here, like you said, here is a testing ground for what works, and to dispel the notion that actually BE legislation in transformation is not working. And so, Ngoku, I want to bring you in here with the Bayakha lens, and you know, the same question is ideally, what do you see as now, what is exciting you on the future?
I think I'll probably pick up on what Fumani said earlier, to say what we try and do as a business is to really align ourselves and support the strategic goals of the country. And if you look at where the country is now, I think infrastructure-led growth is a clear theme within that. I think job creation, infrastructure development, and rural and township development is something that we really need to take seriously and invest a lot of money into in the country. And that's what Bayakha does primarily. And when we wanted to partner with Edge, and why we've partnered with Edge right now, is to leverage the impact measurement capabilities as well of Edge growth. It's all good and well to say this is what we are doing, but do we have the underlying platform systems to prove that impact? And I think that collaboration from that endpoint will really do well for the country. If there's, I mean, a lot of reading that I've done around just how you drive inclusive growth in any economy, that is got to do with job creation, SME development, and infrastructure. And I believe we are bringing those three elements together in this partnership.
And I guess what's important, you know, obviously everything that Fumani said, but from what you're saying is that if we can't measure and show the impact that we're creating, actually, then we're not adding, you know, value to the work that's being done. We need to actually be able to show that the incubation and the funding is moving SMEs further along the curve, creating more jobs and inclusive growth, and actually helping the economy, because the SMEs are the bedrock of the economy, but also a bedrock of job creation. And so I want to bring you into the...
Naz, I just want to add in there, in terms of, you know, what you're saying, Fumani, around creating these archetypes of what works, that only becomes provable, and you're only able to make the trade-offs if you've got the measurement and evaluation to show that actually this form of intervention yielded this outcome and this form of intervention didn't. And hence that's why with this archetype of business, we're going to do more of this and less of that. And so, you know, that just also sits at the foundation of us proving these theories of change in a way that someone would back us and say, okay, you guys are proving these, like, let's scale them.
Exactly. And I think Edge has spent 20 years building this capability in the fund space and building the capability in the incubation space. And so bringing these, you know, bringing the expertise across the table together is actually makes it a better chance of getting there. Dan, I want to bring you into the question I asked Fumani and Ngoku about what are you excited about? What's the the problems that you can now solve that you couldn't when you didn't have this partnership?
So I'm going to be a little bit more granular, just because I feel like they've covered well, like the the principles and the new theories of change and the archetypes that we're trying to land and create a way of doing things that can be supported on a greater scale. Specifically, when I look at this partnership, there's certain things that come up for me. I mean, let's talk about in the fund management space. I think Edge, if we're going to be honest about it, has an excellent track record raising and deploying corporate, largely ESD capital. We are very early on in building a track record and a reputation for managing institutional capital from other types of LPs, DFIs, etc. So that's something which we feel with Pele's support, brand, and the track record that we have, we can open that up. And we can open that up using our existing investment teams and mandates. We can open that up through partnership with other fund managers. We can open that up, through a hybrid of these where we incubate fund managers within the platform. So there's different ways that we can unlock new forms of capital to have different forms of impact. I mean, Ngoku has raised infrastructure as one area which we haven't done that historically. So that's exciting, and we can see it, and we can see it in what we're doing with the Edge Impact Fund, where we're raising very different types of capital to go beyond ESD. We can see it in the potential to incubate an infrastructure fund internally. So there's a range, and we're already doing other forms of platform of funds with other partners. So that's very tangible. Then in the SME development space, our ability to go to a client and say that we can help solve for a community ecosystem issue versus we can run an incubation program which helps this size and stage of SME are two very different solutions. And if you see where ESD has evolved to, when a mining client comes to you, they're not coming to you anymore to say, or at least we hope they're not coming to us to say, please quote us on a 50 SME incubation supply development program. That's like ESD from a decade ago. Now they're saying these are what we're struggling with in our community from a socioeconomic perspective. Help us co-create a programmatic intervention that deals with a number of these different challenges that we face. Now, I mean, I just want to caveat and say that we can't solve for like every economic issue, but with that type of lens, and with the capability of much earlier stage grassroots SME and community development, plus what we do in Edge, access to skills, funding and markets in our incubation approach, we've got a much better chance of solving that problem more holistically in a way that a year later it feels different working in that community, as opposed to just like being able to tick off that you've contributed that money towards a program. And then I think that there are a number of interesting new transformational mandates that are coming into the South African ecosystem on the back of equity equivalent programs. There are a lot of new multinational entrants, and that also finds its way through Competition Commission rulings. And at the end of the day, like when you can't do a pure ownership deal, like what is government saying you need to do as a quid pro quo? It's you need to help the development of a particular value chain, community, and that so often sits at SME development and investing. And so not only with our capabilities, but also with this true transformation brand and story, like we can, with like a very compelling value proposition, go to the government and say, we're walking the talk, like look at this diverse business, look at what we do, and are we not the right partner for this? And I think historically, again, I'm just going to say it as it is, it felt like as Edge we had a lot of capabilities, but there was almost an element of trust from a public sector point of view. Are you guys the real deal? Or are you just utilizing the opportunity here to build a good business? And so, hopefully through this partnership, it proves that it's all of the above.
Absolutely, and I mean that's the one that I'm most excited about. But please go for it.
Sure. I mean, and hopefully I kind of touch on what you were going to ask next. But I think on this question of transformation, it's important that we are frank about, you know, what is the meaning of identity, you know. So, you know, the concept of being a black person is not just something that is embodied in the individual, right? Because I carry the identity as a consequence of a collective and historical struggle that predates my existence, right? And so what I would hope is understood, and what we stress all the time at Billy, is that our blackness is a reference to a collective responsibility, right? It doesn't follow from, you know, my having the skin tone that I will necessarily act in the interests of black people. So when I evoke my identity as a black person, is to remind myself that I have a responsibility to use every single privilege that I've had on the back of my blackness, whether it's accessing education or work opportunities. That comes with a responsibility to solve for the collective. That is, you know, the bedrock of Billy as an organization, and really what we mean by, you know, we are black. We don't happen to be black. We have inherited a really important collective struggle that we need to advance by making things better for more black people. And what I would hope we do and contribute to the story of Edge is to bring that identity and our historical and lived experiences towards the furthering of the cause of the people who remain at the periphery of this economy, and those people are majority black people, and then, you know, women and disabled groups. That is what you know, I would want Dan to even sort of challenge me on, you know, to say, you know, Fu, then, you know, say more, do more, bring more, you know, bring more depth of understanding if that's what's required, so that we can be a genuine actor. You know, when we say that we are black, you know, it should never be enough that I am black simply because of my skin tone. It should be reflected in everything that we do and bring. And so I think in saying that, you know, Edge is now a majority black company, what we're saying is that there is even more of that contextual understanding, and that responsibility is not one that is, in a sense, you know, from Dan's perspective, it might be an understanding of his privilege and what he needs to pay forward, but is also held by people who've lived the experience of being black people and also appreciate that they've had certain advantages, and those advantages come with a responsibility towards a shared collective objective, which is making this country a more equitable country for all, you know. So I just wanted to sort of double check on that.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
If I may add on that, Fu, maybe I'd say one element you forgot to say is to say, and that is how we plan to address inequality. I think we've spoken about growth, challenges in the country, we've spoken about job creation challenges, however we haven't spoken about inequality. And inequality in South Africa exists across individuals, across companies, and throughout the country in various forms. So I think one of the things that attracted me and us to the Edge Growth business is that mission to reduce inequality in all its forms.
And I think, I mean, it's just holding in dynamic tension that you are a product of the masses of this country. And so then, you know, because of that, and because you are, you know, it comes with a big responsibility, and you're bringing in that context not only in the systemic issues that we want to partner with, you know, whether it's the existing corporates or beyond that, that we choose to solve. It's actually then saying there's a deep understanding of what it feels like to sit without a job in Rustenburg. And so now how do we then help someone who knows what that, and we know what that feels like, so how do we help better through SME development?
And also what it feels like to be a small business in the Eastern Cape, as an example, without access to capital. And that's the gap we are trying to solve. In the work that I do, I'm constantly interacting every day with up-and-coming infrastructure developers, you know, who want that access to capital. How can we help them grow so that we can bridge again the inequality between big business and small business, so that the whole economy moves in an inclusive way.
And in some parts of and you know this, in some parts of the country, there's no economy. So how do we actually help create one? For example, in the Northern Cape and what have you. And so, I mean, this might be an on-the-spot question, but it was where I was going with, you know, we've obviously heard the talk about transformation, definitions, whether it works, etc. But I wanted to get each of your perspective on the because as much as, there's opportunities like the EIP, there's also opportunities like the Transformation Fund, which we've been, engaging with. But I'd like to get your view on, the Transformation Fund, what it stands for, and for me personally, it excites me because of what we've just spoken about. It gives us the opportunity to bring that, the responsibility and the knowing of what it feels like to support in the support of SMEs. But getting each of your views on the Transformation Fund.
Going for it? Yeah. Look, I think that it's hard to give a definitive answer because it's still very vague what it is. It's a concept more than it is an actual wealth defined delivery model and operating model. And unfortunately, having been in this space a long time, we know that the devil's in the detail as to how funding flows to SMEs, how the support is operationalized in a way that works for the business, in a way that is going to actually help them on their journey. So that's the caveat. I think that for me, the idea of having discretionary capital that can be deployed to new needs in the economy is a great initiative. And so what I would hope and what would get me excited about the Transformation Fund is, number one, that it's additional and it's not taking from existing initiatives that are working really well and that are impactful. Number two, that it's operationalized well and it leverages best practice and it understands the constraints around a really good operating model so that it actually delivers what it sets out to do. And then I think that as long as we, in setting it up, also don't drive perverse behaviors, because sometimes when you do what with good intent and you set up legislative vehicles, but for some reason the legislation is not married to the unintended consequences, you get something which doesn't deliver on the impact of the original thesis. So all that to say that if it can adhere to those fairly sort of broad principles in the way that it eventually is articulated and rolled out, then surely you're going to have more discretionary capital flowing to a need which we know is critical to the economic growth and upliftment of the country. So it's a bit of a sitting on the fence answer, but I think it's hard to give a very committal answer until we have got more detail around exactly how to roll out and what the specifics of it are.
I think my hope, Nabs, is that it's not a reflection of our having given up. As Dan said, there is more detail to unfold. But often I find that as South Africans, we're quite hard on ourselves, not appreciating that we're on a journey in every respect, and policy will gradually achieve objectives, but also policy is there to be constantly refined. And I think the journey of transformation is one that we shouldn't sort of look at in a static manner. When we started Pele and we're in the position to leverage triple BE, what we understood about ourselves is, on the journey that the country is on, we are no longer justified to be the kind of black business that is a passive holder of assets in the economy. What we want to build is an entity that is deeply operational and has deep sector expertise, right? Because that is where we are historically. We've had the benefit of certain educational opportunities. We've worked, we've been engaged in a way that, let's say, our predecessors as business owners may not have been, right? Because they may have been in politics or whatever it is prior to their getting into business. So from a generational standpoint, the ask is different, right? And what we would hope to see reflected in the continued refinement of the codes is an appreciation of the kind of person who is now able to operate in this economy and the kind of person that this economy has built through these highly institutionalized forms of insisting on transformation, is that we actually do have a critical mass of young black people who can play a much deeper role in this economy. And so what we need are codes that not only emphasize ownership, but actually now look at us as operators and say, you know, what deep skill do you have? And instead of sort of a spray and pray approach in terms of building a massive portfolio, which has a place and is a type of business venture, what we need now are manufacturing entities that are owned and operated by Black people. And so you can build out the entire economy with that deep appreciation. For us, what's been almost disappointing is that we are so committed to the development agenda of the country, but at no point has any government official ever called us in to say, what are you doing for development, right? So it's something we take on, but it's almost as though it's discretionary, when this should be something that is insisted upon, right? The energy department should be saying, you're a Black player in this sector, what are you doing for development? But that has been driven by us. So I think that the state ought to be stronger in holding recipients of the benefit of transformation. They should be stronger in holding us to account, because what we're supposed to do is advance the agenda and not internalize and privatize all the benefit. So the transformation fund will have, of course, whatever place it has in the economy, but it should never be a reflection of failure, because the codes got us to this point, and that's one of the things that I think we don't do enough of. We don't stop to really say, actually, who are the Black businesses? We veer always towards the negative. So it's like, there are 2,000 businesses, and all they've done is take money and not build roads or whatever it is, without an appreciation of the fullness of this economy. And the fact that it's not just businesses that have benefited from the codes, right? You benefit as an employee, you benefit as a top manager, as you ascend in your career. Have we really stopped to understand all of that benefit, and then said, how can we do this better, rather than potentially sort of giving up on the project?
And I think it's also, when you look at the ESD pillar, it's also a function of not telling the stories of impact, where we've actually, we've been in existence for 20 years now, and the impact for more than 14,000 jobs, over 1.8 billion rand of capital deployed, an increase of 30% in revenue growth. Those are hard numbers and impact that's on the ground, and that hasn't filtered through. And so when we say, it's not working, have we asked the question, did we go look? And that's often where, and so I agree that the detail needs to flow through, and it needs to be something that partners with the ecosystem rather than kind of replaces it. What's your take, Ngoku?
Oh wow, I think for me, I'd say as South Africans, we need to support our government a bit more. So I'd say I'm supportive of the need for the fund. I understand why it's there. As a founder myself, who's struggled to access capital, I understand why we need to build a vehicle to deal with that problem. The one important element for me that needs to be in the conceptualization of the fund is good governance. And for me, good governance is all about ethical leadership. And I hope that the leadership that is in charge of that fund is ethical, can deliver on the promise of the fund, which is ultimately access to capital for SMMEs, particularly Black SMMEs, as I understand. But I think that's what we all need to support.
Yeah, and I think it's the access to capital, but it's also the readiness for capital. In my mind, it's the governance, it's the governance question, and then it's also how is the fund ready? Because you can have all of this capital, but if you don't ready those SMEs, nobody's still going to access capital. And then how do you partner? Right? I think my question to each of you then, as we close, is what's your message to the ecosystem who will be watching this? SMEs, your corporate clients, DFIs, and government. What is kind of your message about this partnership to an ecosystem who looks to Edge as a large SME funding incubator, to Knowledge Pele as the leader in renewable energy incubation, and then to Bayakha as the infrastructure partner? What do you have to say to the ecosystem?
I'll have a go. So the first thing that I don't want to be conceited in, but it can be done. I want to say that, first of all. I think that this transformational journey has taken us 20 years, and it's by no means done. But progress can be made, is maybe a better way of saying it, by intentionality and by vulnerability, because this is difficult spaces for all of us to be in. But it requires both, and it requires the patience and the hard work to see it come to fruition. So for me, it's a seminal moment in the business. I know that the numbers, the 70% black owned, 30%, those are just numbers. It's a seminal moment feeling like I'm part of a business that on so many levels is truly diverse and inclusive, albeit still on a journey. So that's the message number one for me, is that it's worth the effort, because the return on effort is exponential. You unlock a different type of energy in an organization that has got real diversity in it and in its ecosystem. And then the second one is that, we really are open for business, in that we want to do more and more radical work in the space of SME development, and we have built an engine and we have partners to do it with. So we really hope that this is like a platform from which we can really exponentialize the impact. It would be sad for me, that if it just remained linear, or if it flattened out. That's why we got into this partnership, is to try and step change it. And so I hope that for those looking at what we've done here as a business, they're seeing it not as a point in time where we're saying, okay, now we've achieved what we want to achieve, and tick. It's actually, we've done this to unlock something new, exciting, and the next frontier of impact.
Nabs, I'm reflecting now, because this morning I had breakfast with one of my colleagues, and she's a new grad in the business, and we're just talking about things we've been watching on Netflix, and one of those things happened to be the documentary on Winnie Mandela. And our conversation was about our concept of, how free are we? Is this the kind of freedom that we had hoped for? And she's much younger than me, and I said to her, I've always understood the project of freedom to be an ongoing project. So I never expected that anyone would deliver the perfect freedom that would then leave us all sort of, basking in all the benefits of what it means to be free without having to do any work for that same project, right? I think for me, our partnership is a reflection of the ongoing work that we are all doing, black and white, towards the same shared thing that we love. I think, you spoke about or you asked us, sort of what brought us together, and what I recall in those early meetings and, in the boardrooms here at Edge, was a chemistry that had to do with that we genuinely do love this country. We love our country. We know that there are many things that can be done to improve it, but we also believe very deeply in the power of individuals to be catalytic, and to use their lives to create benefit for many. And I think that is where we fit in. That is where we fit into the story of the country, and my encouragement, I think, to peers, who are also building businesses, whatever the size, is that one, we are peers, because we're all committed to the same thing. We believe that you can create new economic value. This economy needs to grow, and that requires ideas that are currently embodied to, come into the world. It can be done. Of course, I think, if you're looking at us, then, feel free to reach out to us in whatever way. And, to the extent that, we can partner along the journey, absolutely. But, to Dan's point, it can be done. And the thing that we are doing, or let me say as a personal bias, but the kind of entrepreneur that resonates with me is one that appreciates that we are in the business of creating value for this country. And rest assured, along the way, you'll build a business that is delivering consistent returns, sufficient to attract another party to come and join you on your journey. You'll make money, you'll be comfortable. But the bigger thing that creates comfort and security for us is for the guy you see at the traffic light to be sorted. If that guy's not okay, it doesn't matter how much money you have, right? You will not be comfortable. You will not enjoy a high quality of life. And so I think that commitment to the project of South Africa is key. To holders and owners of capital, I think the message is invest in this country, actually. Take a slightly different perspective, which is not just about risk. Let's also test these assumptions. What are these ideas that we put out there about people needing work experience? Or, and I say that as now an employer. We hire people straight out of university, and they're great. They're smart and they can be taught and they are productive from day one. And I think we also have this odd bias around what a business ought to look like. And then you look across many ponds to Silicon Valley, and people literally roll out of bed with ideas and are given billions to build massive businesses that succeed. And it's because from a garage, right? And it's because the orientation of that society is that there's a belief, firstly in young people, but also in that businesses can create massive value. And I think South Africa needs to get out of this, 4 banks, four mines, for this kind of mentality if we're going to build a country that delivers value for all of us. So invest, you have capital, invest, and you'll see amazing things.
I think Fu said a lot there. So I think I'll probably say I'm hopeful. I grew up in the 90s. And if you grew up in the 90s, you'll remember that was the most hopeful time in our country. I feel like before the oil crisis this year, we were back at that point. So I'm filled with hope. And I'm hopeful that this partnership will do a lot for our country, for our people, and all our employees.
That's great. And so what I'm hearing is the message to the ecosystem is that if you are holders of capital or you are an ecosystem player and you are looking to partner with this partnership that's invested in radical SME development that evolves our economic freedom in an inclusive, responsible and equitable way. That is the new frontier of what this partnership wants to enable, and anyone who wants to come on that journey with us is more than welcome. Thank you so much for your time.